It's the Redbird Reboot podcast. Are you ready to get rebooted, Cardinals fans? He settles down, at least in the zone, and does not stop running.
Blake Murphy.
This is the identity for the Arizona Cardinals.
The run defense is just horrendous, and it's been horrendous for the Cardinals for a long time.
And Marcos Labrada.
He's going to bring over his philosophy. It should make it better.
Present the hottest NFL podcast from the country's hottest state.
He should be turning around the logo.
Actually, some breaking news we can cover here. This popped up just about, 6 minutes ago.
It's Redbird Reboot.
And welcome
it's the
in.
Redbird Reboot podcast. Are you ready to get rebooted, Cardinals fans?
We are super excited to see you guys all in here as we discuss. Another Cardinals loss is here on the docket for us as we join in with the Redbird Reboot podcast. Thank you guys so much for joining me and Marcos as we're here to discuss what feels like Groundhog Day in the desert. It's Groundhog Day again, fifth straight loss. The Cardinals have a lead in the fourth quarter. They blow the lead in the fourth quarter, and the offense has a chance to go down and try to be able to win the game with a touchdown. They come up short again. Marcos, it's gotten frustrating for Cardinals fans. We now head into the bye week. We'll see what post-bye adjustments are made. It seems like Kyler Murray himself is probably going to be the biggest adjustment we see for the Arizona Cardinals. But this was ultimately another disappointing loss because the Cardinals effectively felt like that they were in charge of this game from the get-go on defense, as we've seen so many times before. They're up 13-3, 3-6 throughout most of the first half. Go and drive down to get a touchdown to the likes of Trey McBride back. I believe it was his first 2-touchdown game. He hasn't had very many touchdowns in his career, so a 2-touchdown game for Trey McBride. Packers in 2 plays are able to go 22 yards, get a 61-yard field goal. You get to the second half, after a punt and then a fumble pass that you have that led to a 2 easy touchdown for the Packers. Cardinals were able to respond at the end of the third quarter. First play of the fourth quarter, Green Bay is able to punch it in for a touchdown, making it a 2020 game, I should say. Arizona Cardinals end up wrapping up with a field goal before a few back and forths that ended up leading to a Packers touchdown. Instead, Packers did decide to go for it on 4th and 2. They get a 15-yard pass play on what seemed like it was a bit of a push-off, potentially a little bit at least of a no-call. Maybe some people find it controversial there. Ultimately, though, the offense took over with 1 minute and 50 seconds left in the game, having to score 4 points, meaning you needed a touchdown. The Hail Mary pass, after not using some of the timeouts, some questions there, came up incomplete, and the Cardinals lost to the Green Bay Packers. They now fall to 2-5 on the season. What is the biggest takeaways that you have, Marcos, coming out of this game for the Cardinals, as it just felt like heading into the fourth quarter, Cardinals were going to blow that 20-13 lead. They were going to give up the big plays when they needed to stop them. And it just felt like another loss was on the docket when that fourth down play to Jacoby Brissett went up the middle at 4, no gain.
Yeah, it's just coaching that really came up. It's very strange because they've won games that are close and like earlier in their tenure. I remember that game against the Atlanta Falcons when Kyler Murray first came back, and they generated enough of like a drive to be able to not only get the third and long where Kyler Murray scrambled and got the first down, and then that deep pass by Trey, taking it down to the 1, making sure James Conner doesn't score, kicking the ball with time running out and winning that game. So they know how to do stuff like this before, and they know how to like control or what kind of decisions to make. But it's just been this year, it seems like we're telling ourselves, hey, this is what needs to happen, or hey, come on, call a timeout, or hey, just, get it to the outside guy, run the ball, throw it on this drive. We're yelling at the TV, and they can't listen to us, obviously, through a screen, but they're doing something that's like kind of like the antithesis of that to try to lose the game, because I think a lot of people came away from this thinking to themselves, we're just going to lose in the fourth quarter. We're going to lose this game. Like when the momentum started shifting and we knew for a fact, like, oh, it shifted, really put us behind on this drive that we really needed, they're just going to they're just going to lose this game. And that's exactly what keeps happening. And that just straight up is just coaching.
Yeah, at the end of the game, at least, you ended up with the Green Bay Packers after the Arizona Cardinals took over on downs. The Packers took over, and they were able to notch off at least a 10-play, 48-yard drive from the Arizona 48-yard line, I believe. It wasn't too difficult, just a couple 3-yard runs, and a little bit to Tucker Kraft, Josh Jacobs. It was basically those two guys that did the most amount of damage at the end. And then when the Packers had a chance to tie the game, they send the field goal unit out onto the field. And then they pull the field goal unit from the field. And I was like, this is the Cardinals. If they're a team in the fourth quarter, you talk about where they're reeling from being punched in the face a lot of times. You hit them hard in the face. They don't have a counter punch in the fourth quarter, just the way that it's been so far. They drop a great play with Tucker Kraft being able to get him 15 yards. It sets them up over at the Arizona 14-yard line from the 30-yard line. He'd already kicked a 61-yard field goal, so you feel like, yeah, at least we're going to be having the Cardinals with a chance to potentially go kick a field goal if they're able to hold the defense there. They were not. They were able to run with Josh Jacobs after that 15-yard pass play, another 14 yards, and punch it in. The Cardinals, whether it is just thinking through with how things have been different this year or not, they used to have more goal line stands. It felt like it seems that opposing offenses have just figured out something with their defense on the goal line. They were able to get a couple of runs with Josh Jacobs and then punch it in. He is one of the best running backs, obviously, in the NFL right now. The biggest thing, Marcos, is that for the second week in a row, it's not the Cardinals losing on a last-second field goal. This is with Jacoby Brissett having the ball in his hand. A lot of fans have wondered, could the Cardinals have won this game if Kyler had the ball the last 2 weeks? I think we'll get a chance to find out. He's reportedly, according to Ian Rappaport, going to be back next week. Adam Schefter has confirmed this as well. And by next week, I mean following the Cardinals bye week, because Cardinals head into a bye now, having lost 5 games in a row. This season, for all intents and purposes, is really going to come down to the next 2 games. If you're able to right the ship with a win against Dallas, get another win out of the next 2 games against then the San Francisco 49ers, and I believe the next team that they're going to play is the Seattle Seahawks. You've got a chance to be able to right the ship, be able to then take a look at the other parts of your schedule. You still have the Rams to play. You still have the Jaguars on the schedule in between a brutal slot of games against teams such as the Buccaneers, the Bengals with probably Joe Burrow back, and the Los Angeles Rams, as we've said twice. As far as this game goes, Marcos, the biggest storyline, I think, is honestly the defense played really well for the first part of the game. Like, the Cardinals went out and were able to score going down the field, which is something that's very impressive when you take a look, at least as far as how things were set up. The Packers had kept teams from scoring on their first drive all season long. Cardinals go down and were able to get a field goal. They then were able to hold the Packers to 2 field goals, 2 punts, and after a 4th down play that the Packers ran was incomplete, I believe it was, that the Cardinals were able to take over. It was a defensive struggle, and ultimately what we can say is there's credit we can give to the defense, but at the end of the day, the fourth quarter defense where you're going to be rushing forward, dropping back 7, and as you mentioned, some offensive coaching mistakes. This was Micah Parsons' first 3-sack game with the Green Bay Packers since he was traded from the Dallas Cowboys, and too many of those sacks came in a one-on-one matchup scenario against Cardinals right tackle Jonah Williams. Felt like one of those "what are we doing here" sort of moments for the Cardinals and Drew Petzing for why they would. I understand leaving your guy in isolation for your offense, but they left him on an island so often in that game that he was able to get that 3-sack performance, including a very clutch sack on Jacoby Brissett that basically sunk the Cardinals' chances late in the fourth quarter.
I think I'll criticize all the coaching, to be honest with you, because there's a lot that Jonathan Gannon can take like blame for in this game. So as a coach, let's say you're in a bad situation. Let's take the example last year of Eberflus and how he didn't call a timeout when a play call was called by his his offensive coordinator being in a position where he doesn't know what the heck he's doing, and he calls a duo call with a 5'10", 190-pound wide receiver at the edge position, or helping to double team block the edge. and the defensive end is
Brutal.
like 250, and he just runs them over, and then they get the tackle. The coach is in charge of, like, one, he can say, no, we're not going to run that. Are you crazy? That guy's 190 pounds. Or you can come to the sideline and say, timeout, timeout. Like, okay, let's reset. That's not the play we should be going with. That's something that Jonathan Gannon can definitely do. So when they ran up the line and tried to run that hurry up play, Jonathan Gannon could have just called timeout and overseeded whatever Drew Petzing wanted to do, because his job is to protect the team and put him in a position to be able to win. We've seen on defense Cliff Kingsbury come over and call timeouts. Whenever, let's remember that San Francisco 49 Halloween game, when the Cardinals get a stop on 4th down, Cliff Kingsbury stopped them because he came over to the sideline and said, no, let's call timeout. They get the stop, and he's like, okay, well, but that goes on Cliff Kingsbury. That doesn't go on Vance Joseph, because Vance Joseph is just a coordinator. So in that certain situation, Drew Petzing didn't use the common sense to be able to say, Jonah's, I'm sorry to say this, but Jonah's bad. And you cannot put Jonah Williams one-on-one with an all-pro Micah Parsons to take the edge and basically just toy around with him as much as you can. Now, we didn't have DeMarcado in this game, and that's one of the reasons why I mentioned, hey, if you do have someone like DeMarcado where you want to cut him, who's your third down pass protector? Well, it doesn't matter right now because he's not out there, but that's the reason why they kept him, because in that situation, you could have him check and release where he hits him with the shoulder, slows Micah Parsons down enough time to be able to get out there, because I know that it's not good to be able to chip and release. I know that, because you lose a weapon on the offensive side when you need all your weapons. But in that situation, you'd much rather have help sent to Micah Parsons so he doesn't get to the backfield and wreck your game plan. Once again, Jonathan Gannon can also supersede that and say, like, look, Pets, we got to send help. Like, he's getting killed out there. He could definitely do that. He can definitely call any type of, like, changes, formations. Jacoby Brissett can also do that too. Jacoby Brissett can give a stay call and whatnot. So there's a lot of collective blame here, but the head coach is still the guy who runs this ship. Yeah. And that has nothing to do with the defense. I have some words about the defense. We'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah, this is a game that offensively the Cardinals should have won. When you take a look at how the Packers had played ultimately, Cardinals had more first downs. They were more efficient on 3rd down with 7 out of 14 versus 3 out of 10. Struggled on 4th down. That was something that was big, but they had 330 total yards of offense. They had, I believe Jacoby was 25 of 36 for about 270, I want to say, about passing yards. As far as rushing went, the Cardinals really were effective, while not efficient. They had about 94 yards of rushing on 28 attempts, very similar to what the Packers had. Packers had Josh Jacobs on a snap count. Even Cardinals won the penalty game. Green Bay had 10 penalties for 94 yards. Cardinals won, as usual, the time of possession. What this game really came down to at the end, though, was the number of sacks was a huge difference. Cardinals got to Jordan Love once, while the Packers got to Jacoby Brissett 6 times, losing 55 yards on those sacks. Some of those sacks, obviously, are Jacoby scrambling or trying to get back to the line of scrimmage. They, even despite the way that the Packers offense struggled for the most part, Cardinals really played the game and had things in their hands. It's just that the defense, when it came time to hold, they were not able to hold down. You can say that whether you agree with the 4th down play going for it or not. Either way, the call that they made to be able to rush and do essentially not even a tush push necessarily, but a middle of the line quarterback sneak, it would have been best at least to be able to have a few more options available. You've seen when they have Brissett in, they really just trust that play. They don't really trust to throw it on 4th down like the Packers did on 4th and 2. It just kind of was a difference, like you said, in the coaching staff, a coaching staff who not only had a plan, but had a plan that was going to work. That's one of the things we saw. There was a huge amount of confidence called on that 4th and 2 play, the picking up of 15 yards. It felt like that the one coach was, we know how to beat this defense. Meanwhile, the Cardinals on their side, they did not have anything available outside of push behind the quarterback, hope that we get 2 yards instead of 1 and are able to pick up that 4th down. Felt like it was just a veteran, has been to the playoffs and back coaching staff against a coaching staff in the Cardinals that has struggled to have a winning season. And I think, Marcos, that's where we can talk a little bit about some of the future of this Cardinals team, because when we take a look at Jonathan Gannon's overall record as a head coach, it's not very impressive, at least when we're talking about compared to other NFL head coaches. Most head coaches, they come in, they end up being able to make the playoffs and get a contract extension, or they get fired. Jonathan Gannon's now 14-26. as a head coach in the NFL. We can talk about with Kyler Murray, he's at a little bit under 500. Without Kyler Murray, this is the second game in a row the Cardinals have played without Kyler at quarterback. They have one win, Marcos. They have one win. Jacoby is 0-2 as the Cardinals starter. So regardless of the efficiency of the offense, of playing better, of seeing some of the deep passing game continue to unlock, there was 2 catches for Marvin Harrison Jr. that led to, I believe it was.
He had 2 penalties and he had 2
Yeah,
big catches.
2 penalties, 2 big catches at least. As far as receiving, they were led in receiving by Trey McBride. It was 58 yards, I think it was, including the 129-yarder to Marvin Harrison Jr. But ultimately, we've seen Trey McBride get unlocked as a weapon in both the red zone, which he has been. It just hasn't been to this degree. I think mostly last year, where he did not get a touchdown until pretty much the end of the season, I think had a little bit of a sway on that. Wasn't for lack of trying. What we've kind of seen is a banged-up Cardinals team that's been running Bam Knight out there at running back, still is unable to run the ball. They have not been able to get to 100 yards rushing for the last few weeks. We've seen them be able to throw the ball effectively. It was 280 yards for Jacoby. I think the big question when it comes down to it, at least, is like we've said with this coaching staff. If we're in this spot and we don't see the coaching staff make adjustments out of the break, they've lost 5 games in a row. Marcos, if they're going to get back to not even a winning season this year, let's toss that out the door. If you're going to get back to a 7-win season right now for the Cardinals, you're going to have to win 5 of your next 10 games, go 500 down the stretch the rest of the way just to get to a 7-win season. That would be not only a disappointment from what expectations were this season, a lot of people would argue that is pretty unrealistic. And that, I think, casts a lot of doubt on this coaching staff, because anything under 6 wins or so, you take a look at 3 years in the NFL, no playoff appearances, no winning records, and a step back from where they were at a year ago with a arguably more talented roster. Feels like that in a lot of ways the Cardinals are getting out-coached week in and week out, and that tells me you probably are going to struggle to make any sort of moves forward, not just with Drew Petzing or not even with Nick Rallis with this fourth quarter defense, but with the culture and everything Jonathan Gannon has built. It feels like, Marcos, there's a culture of losing that is being built right now for the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah, so that's the one primary thing that we were gonna have changed was the culture from last coaching staff to this coaching staff, and we have lost. What was it, like the first 9? We went 1-9, I believe, before Kyler Murray joined the Cardinals. I don't quote me on that, but you had this mulligan season that you were kind of thinking for yourself. Mulligan seasons are usually brought on by people who will draft their quarterback number 1 overall or draft somebody top 10 and start a regime. This wasn't that same type of mulligan, because we did have the opportunity to tell ourselves, well, if we win, let's just say we win like 5 games, Kyler Murray comes back, we can make the playoffs, and then we can go. We weren't giving ourselves that mulligan per se. We were just trying to see what was going to happen. I feel like we're still in that like type of situation. That type of situation is bad for culture, because if we're in the wait and see like, hey, we're just gonna wait and see what happens. Every game is like, okay, we'll see how this game turns out, then we'll make our decision. Or like, hey, we'll see how the team like responds, and we'll figure out what we're gonna do. We need to quit being responsive. I believe right now we're doing a lot of half measures, and I was going to crash out about this last night, but I didn't. But I'm sick and tired of the half measures. The great teams do not do half measures. They get a plan, they commit whichever direction they're going to go. Are we going to tank and then go get our guy for the future? Well, then we're going to do that, and we're not going to BS around. We're going to sell some assets. We're going to get ourselves as much capital as we can to be able to move up to get our guy, or to be able to get people in if we're in position to be able to draft our guy. And if that's not the direction, and you want to go to the direction saying we still believe that this team can win, first of all, you're not going to make it to the playoffs because you already have too many losses in the NFC West. You need to get that out of your mind. But if you want to be like, hey, we're going to be a culture team, we're going to finish this year strong, we're going to rebuild during the offseason, and we're going to go for it next year, that's going to be a hard sell for the fans. But at least come out and say it. This is what we will do. Not like, well, we'll see, Kyler Murray's going to come back, against the Cowboys, and, we'll see what happens there. Like,
Yeah, I think I agree with you. That's one of the reasons why I think a lot of people are selling on this coaching staff right now is because it does not even appear that there are answers. Like if they say, "Hey, we figured out in the fourth quarter the reason why things are failing is because of this." If they feel like there's a competitive advantage that they need to keep that secret, well, it's cool, but guess what? You still have to go out there and be able to win the game. The fact that they've not been able to fix the issue that they've been having consistently shows they don't understand what the problem is. And it tells me it's a fundamental scheme issue of the rushing four, dropping seven, keeping a lot of the soft coverage, and opposing offensive coordinators. No, the Cardinals are not able to get pressure right now the way that things are without being able to rush more guys that they're having, of being able to bring some guys on the blitz. And when they do bring guys on the blitz, we've seen a lot of these all-out jailbreak blitzes that Nick Rallis has had, which allow veteran quarterbacks to just simply take the short, quick route over the middle, something a taller quarterback's able to do, something that a shorter quarterback in Kyler Murray, we've seen at times, will have to usually scramble around to try to make sure that he can keep his sight lines, try to be able to make a play. It's one of those places where things just have had a hard time of being able to match up. And it has me looking at this Cardinals front office saying, hey, this is a spot of looking at the roster you guys have put together. A lot of the draft picks people have talked about have not quite worked out. And a lot of these, granted, is due to injuries, such as to Trey Benson and Tip Ryman. Darius Robinson had a couple of pressures. It was his first multi-pressure game. I know that's 2 seasons in, but with the 2 first-round picks and with Marvin already having been a disappointment from what expectations were, when you said that there is one receiver who had 2 catches for 67 yards and another receiver who had 2 catches for 58 yards, and one player had 10 catches for 74 yards, you'd be thinking, okay, pretty sure it's got to be Trey and then Marv. But instead, we've seen that Zay Jones is the guy who ends up being essentially the go-to target in a lot of ways, even being a deep threat with a 43-yard bomb from Jacoby. One of these missing pieces just seems to be that there is a front office and a coaching staff that haven't quite been able to get everything played out the way that I think we had anticipated from this team building. Obviously, you lose your starting quarterback to injury. That plays a part. You lose a guy like James Conner, who's the heart and soul of your team. That does also play a huge part. But with on the defensive side of the ball, this team is too talented to be giving up about 26, 27 points a game. You've got Budda Baker with Calais Campbell still playing at a high level. Dalvin Tomlinson has looked good. Like the Cardinals have not been gashed in the run game like a bad run defense this year. They've been average. Baron Browning's been able to get after the quarterback. We got to see Zaven Collins get a sack. The linebackers have struggled at times. Josh Jacobs, there was one play where ADG had a good Pro Football Focus grade in this game. He did really struggle as far as keeping some of the sight lines and some of the run tackles very late in the fourth quarter. Maybe that's part of the common denominator. But it's one of those areas where when you're trying to figure out the issue with this Cardinals team, the answer fundamentally comes down to is that they're a good team through the first 3 quarters, and they're a very bad team when it comes down into the clutch. Essentially, what that means is that they do not have that football character that when they get punched or bend a little bit like that one, instead of bouncing back, they just break. And that's something that's been unfortunate because to me, it's a direct reflection of the confidence that the players have in themselves and the head coach to have this sort of a slide over the last 5 games and to not see someone call for them to step up, to have someone lead, like we've said. It's just been frustrating, and it's something that I think a lot of fans who went to the game on Sunday are looking at seeing. Packers fans all over the crowd. We've seen, Marcos, when this is a winning Cardinals team that people can support, people fill those stands in red, like the 2015, 2016 Cardinals. People don't really remember a lot of times, but there was a lot less opposing fans in those stands. Even in 2021, we got to see a little bit of a shift where it was like a lot of Cardinals fans were there present. There was Packers fans for sure that were there with the Cardinals-Packers Week 7 game that resulted in the A.J. Green kind of turnaround. But this is a team that, because of their losing history, they have to work extra hard in order to be able to kind of grab your attention in a way that the Phoenix Suns, the Arizona State Sun Devils, the U of A Wildcats, even the Arizona Diamondbacks don't have to do because of that sort of losing culture that's popped up. And I think that it's one of those areas that, Marcos, if this does continue with the Cardinals unable to turn it around, I don't think it would be acceptable to bring this coaching staff back. Like you said, it does feel like they're under the microscope for not just the remainder of the season, but we may have a decision that we're going to be making on them within the next 3 to 4 games, as wild as that may seem.
So I got like two things to. First, I got a story. Number two, is going to be a question for you. So here's the story. Talking about the culture. You remember the 2010 shootout between the Cardinals and the Packers? Um, that day, I was at Westgate at McFadden's, and I McFadden's is just right off like where the Coyotes' old stadium was at, right there by where Westgate's at, one of the premier spots. I guarantee it's probably called something else now. So that day, I saw a lot of red shirts, red jerseys. You had your favorite, guys that you saw constantly. Of course, you had a lot of 11s. And I remember seeing a few Packers fans, and I watched the stands, and I saw a lot of red. I did see green because there's going to be people that are going to come from other places that are going to be fans from other teams. But I remember that culture having, hey, we got a winning season and 10-6 season. That's actually like what you would say is a pretty good season. And then being that you just made the Super Bowl the year before, that it immediately gravitated to your fans showing up more for these games, showing like an actual home field advantage. I believe, and I'm not sure if this is true, the Cardinals sold out their first, like 26 games after the stadium was built. It was somewhere like a crazy number like that because people were yearning. They were tired of being at the Sun Devil Stadium and being at another team stadium and sitting down in the heat. And then when that thing was voted, Michael Bidwell did as much criticism as I had about him. They did their politician thing. They pushed this through. They were able to get the votes to be able to build the stadium. They built the stadium. People were immediately like, "Look, we're not a home Cardinals team because they came here from out of town from St. Louis, but we grew up. We were born, and the Cardinals were our team, and now we have a home." And that's what they did. That's where you started to see the culture shift, even if they were losing. And then you had subsequently two coaching staffs that at least had some great success with this team that did that. And then the downturn started happening where now we're known for being the team that's at home that has to go on silent count because opposing teams come in droves and they go rent the hotels at the Renaissance and buy them out. They go drink, and then they go to the stadium right before. It's a great experience, but it's a great experience for other fans to come in to our own stadium. Plus, we host Super Bowls, so people are used to being able to come in here. So it's something that, like, now fans are just seeing it be more lucrative to sell their tickets so that they can make an uptick in money than to actually show up to cheer for the team because they'd rather do that at home because at home you could be disappointed, but you can go sit down. You can drink yourself like crazy and then be like, I'm done, just going to go sit down and go like loathe about the fact that the Cardinals are still the Cardinals and whatnot. So that's number one. I have question number two. This has to do with the defense, or not question number two. So here's a question. What is your biggest memory of a big defensive stop by the Cardinals? Like historically speaking, like, hey, this was a crazy end to this game, and it was on defense.
Yeah, I think if I have to remember one of the best defensive stops, it would have to be where the Cardinals, it was 2013, and the Arizona Cardinals were playing the Seattle Seahawks, actually. This was the Legion of Boom, the year the Seahawks won the Super Bowl. Arizona's on the road. They had gone down, had that touchdown to Michael Floyd. And on the way back, there was like a last-ditch sort of play that the Seahawks were having to make, and the Cardinals held. That's one of the memories I have. I also remember a couple of times where there was at least one or two times it was the inside linebacker, Carlos Dansby, the Cardinals scooping up that Aaron Rodgers fumble and running back into the end zone that ended as probably the biggest one for sure in Cardinals history. That you can remember.
That's the Packers game.
Packers game. And then the third one, at least, if you have to remember, is the one where it was the Donovan McNabb, the pass falling short, at least on, I think it was fourth down, where the Cardinals were taking that trip to the Super Bowl. But what's really interesting and in common in all of them, Marcos, was you had a stud linebacker who was a guy in the middle of the field, in the middle of the defense, was able to make a play. Now, obviously, the corner blitz with Adams on Rodgers was a big part of that for the initial play. But one of the things that we've talked about here is that the signature defensive plays, we saw those the first 2 weeks of the season. There's a signature defensive pass breakup that we saw that stopped the Saints from coming back in. That was kind of that was close. And then there was a signature defensive pass breakup against the Panthers that popped up too just this season. we have not seen that for 5 straight weeks. The Cardinals have actually just kind of let teams be able to get into the end zone or have those game-winning kicks when they've needed to hold. It's been one of those places where if you wanted to argue that there's been a guy or an injury or however you wanted to put that around, it just has not been, unfortunately, something that we've seen. And that's something that I think Cardinals fans are hoping that we can at least be able to see. If they can get one more of those signature defensive stops, it'd have to be up against their next opponent in the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah. Oh, my bad. I was going to.
No, it's all right. Let's go ahead and just do a little bit of halftime here and read out some of our people who are in our show. For the most part, we got Silver Wolf joining, saying "Let's go." For the most part, that is exactly our thing. We talked about potentially just re-airing our show from last week, re-airing it again, just because it's the same thing over week in and week out. We're like, no, we want to make sure we're getting the right content for you guys. Got Robert Moore back over in the chat, saying when the offense came back on the field, should have called a timeout to game plan. 100% agree, Robert. JG's been going in with so many timeouts in the bank. They could have trotted that team out onto the field, seen what defense the Packers would have loaded up, been able to kind of suddenly change everything, be able to call a timeout, make them think about it again. That would have been great. We got Accelerator saying the Cardinals have nothing to be ashamed of. Packers are a legit Super Bowl agenda. The fact that the Cardinals were in it is amazing. Normally, I think I'd agree, Accelerator. Like, that's something that, like, when you're talking about the Packers being a Super Bowl contender, that's great. But I think the struggle Marcos and I have is this Green Bay Packers team, they played tough and had the same result as when they played the Tennessee Titans and the Titans offense and the Titans defense. It was a far worse Titans team the Cardinals played, and sure, they stayed in it, but this is a team that is just finding new ways to lose games, whether it's to a Super Bowl contender like the Packers or to someone like the Tennessee Titans. We'll get to the rest of our comments here at the end of our show, since that's about some future draft picks and some questions there. But Marcos, you had another question we wanted to get into, and I wanted to make sure I gave you some time on the mic with just talking about some of this offense and what we're seeing, because there's enough efficiency from Jacoby Brissett. Some people are questioning, do you even go back to Kyler Murray? What's going to be the point of going back to Kyler Murray? Does he give you the best chance to win? And I think that he does, but there's been enough that we've seen that if Kyler goes back and we do see some second half struggles, like similar to what we saw earlier in the season, it's going to be a lot easier for me to want to just pull the plug full time.
Well, this was something that was that Blake Murphy, I was going to say, Brett Coleman and EJ Snyder had brought up, and they said, does it feel like it's going to be different if Kyler Murray was in? And they told themselves, and they said, hey, that's not exactly what I would feel like it would happen. And so to me, it's like there's certain things that are better, but then there's certain things that aren't as good. And this is what I mentioned when I mentioned with the half measures. I mentioned, like, hey, you're either going to go all this way or you're going to go all the other way when it comes to making a decision. And if you bring back Kyler Murray, it's because you're trying to salvage the rest of the season in your mind. But if that doesn't happen, you essentially win like a few more games that'll put you back on the draft status, or you lose out of getting assets and you get yourself in a position where you're not able to like make better decisions for your team. So that's the reason why go one way or go the other, but just don't be half measured and stuff.
No, I totally agree. At least that's something that we need to see them not full half measure. We want them to be in a spot, at least if you're a Cardinals fan, where they're looking to buy. And instead, what we're seeing with this team so far is that they get to play their Monday Night Football game following this bye week. They'll get a chance to reset. And then we'll get to find out on the Monday following the bye week, are they going to be sellers at the trade deadline for that next week? That's something that I think is going to be very interesting. Let's talk about some positives that we got to see, though, coming out of the game. I'm going to pull up the Pro Football Focus scores that we got to see for this game. Highest performer, as we could usually expect week in and week out, was the likes of Paris Johnson. That's something that we've been able to at least see with the Arizona Cardinals. And I'll pull this up here so that it gets a little bit larger for you guys to be able to see here. But Paris Johnson was the number one, followed by Trey McBride. So those are like your two guys. Paris has played at a Pro Bowl level this year. It would not shock me if Paris does get to the Pro Bowl, even as an alternate this year. You got to see Jacoby Brissett has played. This is for the season, I should say, excuse me, at least. So I'll pull up the defense and what we've had for the offensive grades, but pretty similar. Paris Johnson, the number one in PFF. He's turned into one of the best left tackles in the league. Zay Jones followed up and played relatively well in the grading. Not as well of a game for Marvin Harrison Jr. I think that I agree with you. He had a few big plays, but didn't have the same level of being able to get open as someone like Zay Jones did. We also got to see Michael Wilson actually have, in terms of how this offense has looked since the Cardinals have made this switch to more of an 11 personnel offense, getting Zay Jones, Marv, and Michael Wilson all on the field at the same time. It's looked pretty solid for the most part in the passing game. It's been effective. It's been efficient. We've seen that they do have talent at the wide receiver position, not the likes of A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith talent, but they've at least been able to have a great passing game. What we've struggled to see for the most part, I think, has been in this game especially, solid pass blocking. So Halte Froholt was the best against the Packers, who are not with Kenny Clark anymore. He is now with the Dallas Cowboys. They'll play next week. But the guys who did the worst, ultimately, Bam Knight, starting running back, did not do well in pass protection. There was a pass play that was on 2nd and 9 that Jacoby Brissett just missed. It wasn't even him in that play. It was Michael Carter who was in for pass protection. But Jonah Williams had his worst graded game of the season at 44 overall and a 22.9 in pass protection. It was one of those places where, Marcos, one of the adjustments I think the Cardinals should look at coming out of the bye week is saying, hey, we're taking a look at the season and how things have turned around. One of these players who was in there for a few snaps has actually played at a solid enough level in pass protection, despite the lack of run blocking. I would say that I think this team does better with Kelvin Beachum at left tackle, despite giving up Jonah Williams run blocking, than they do having Jonah. And I would make that move post-bye, because I just think that it gels better with him next to Will Hernandez. And at this point, as a Cardinals team, you got to embrace the pass, because the run game is just simply not there. We'll see what happens when Trey Benson, if he comes back, maybe that gives you enough of a jolt. But it was one of those places where you need to have some accountability, and Jonah Williams, being left in one-on-one coverage, was not able to handle Micah Parsons. Perhaps that is just negligence on the coaching staff's part versus the player himself. But it's been a frustration since they signed him to that 2-year deal a year ago, with him missing most of the year due to injury and then struggling when he has played.
Yeah, so like we brought this up like time and time again, especially what is it? EJ Snyder even brought it up, and they brought it up on their little podcast, saying that this is the only one hiccup that I have with Monty Ossenfort, was like giving that much money to somebody like Jonah Williams and whatnot. And now we're seeing exactly why that's the reason, and why that's being the situation. I brought up before. He was let go by a team that has a horrible offensive line for a reason. It's like they are giving that up because they're going to upgrade tackle from him, and not necessarily saying like, hey, we just don't want to pay you the money because you're too much. No, they wanted to let him go because he was part of that issue of being beat one-on-one. And I'm noticing that even the run blocking is lower than even Kelvin Beachum is. Kelvin Beachum is not a great run blocking tight end tackle, but the guy is a way better pass protector than he's being given credit for, especially at his advanced age.
Yeah, and part of with Jonah, like I'd said in the start of the season, I would have loved to have had him start off at right tackle and then move to that swing tackle. It should be starting off at right guard, and then when Will Hernandez came back, moved to that backup swing tackle spot, so you'd be able to trot out either a draft pick or someone else. We obviously saw the Cardinals were not able to get one of the top offensive tackles this year. They all went, which led to the fall of one of those defensive tackles who has not played yet in Walter Nolan. I think we'll get to see Nolan go out against the Cowboys. The Cowboys have a pretty healthy offense overall. It's going to be really interesting because, Marcos, you're going to get Kyler back. You're probably going to get Trey Benson back. You're going to have a pretty good complement of all of your offensive weapons then that you have healthy enough, at least, not the guys out for the season necessarily, like a Tip Ryman or James Conner. But you'll have those guys up against a Cowboys defense that has been a huge sieve as far as just letting opposing teams be able to score on them. The struggle, of course, is when we take a look at the defensive side, because the Cowboys, they hung 44 points up. And what we see still with the Arizona Cardinals is your best overall defender is the oldest defender. That is Calais Campbell, who still is having a fantastic year when it comes to in run defense. He seems like a timeless sort of wonder. We got to see that Akeem Davis-Gaither had his highest graded game. Most of it came from his coverage skill and coverage ability, not necessarily his run defense. That was relatively low. His tackling grade, of course, was something that was brought down. The coverage has been solid, but what we've seen when it comes to the tackling for the Arizona Cardinals, you take a look at the bottom of that list. Calais, it makes sense because he's getting older in there. There's a lot of effort, and his role has been kind of to be the penetrator. Keem Davis-Gaither is a linebacker. Your job is to tackle. And Darius Robinson has been consistently ranking at one of the lower ends of grading for the Arizona Cardinals. But when it comes to what we've seen as far as something to build around, you again have the other timeless wonder. Buda Baker is still the highest graded with tackling. Will Johnson did well when it came to his tackling as well. As far as coverage went, you got the safety and the linebacker did super well. All in all, the biggest struggle for the Cardinals when it came down to it was simply that there was enough missed tackles in this game from guys up front against Josh Jacobs, and that's where we got to see with Calais, with Darius, and with Akeem Davis-Gaither. Two of those guys still, because of being able to do well enough in the run defense and pass rush and coverage, were good enough to be able to, I think, get the win for the Cardinals. It's kind of one of those, like, you'll give up something in one end if you can exchange it for something else. It's like that's the sort of equivalence that you're looking for. But again, when it comes to the defensive side, you got to wonder, does this Cardinals defense have the opportunity to stop a Dak Prescott getting back a healthy CeeDee Lamb with George Pickens on the other side, with a running back in Javonte Williams who's averaging just under 100 yards rushing per game as part of that new offensive look unit with Clayton Adams, former Cardinals offensive line coaches over there. I think looking forward, Marcos, it's really hard to see this Cardinals team being able to, even with the extra week of prep and time and work, and even with Kyler Murray in Dallas, it just does not feel like this is a Cardinals team that's going to be able to defensively be able to get that clutch stop in the fourth quarter. You're going to kind of have to hope that this can be a Cowboys team that makes a terrible mistake in the fourth quarter, a kind of cowboy the game away is, I think, at least what you're looking for. So when those two sides meet each other, it's going to be really interesting to see where they are, because the Dallas Cowboys to this season, Marcos, they don't look like a playoff team, but they look like they've surpassed the Commanders thus far. They're second in the NFC East this year. And it's something where after coming off that 44-22 game, I'm kind of worried. You can't have the Cardinals go in and you want to see like Dallas's Kyler Murray needs to play super well in his return to his home state and his hometown, where up until now he has been undefeated so far.
Yeah, that is definitely his home stadium. He hasn't taken a loss there. He has upped his play. That's the reason why Walter Nolan coming back would be is such a key, because of the fact that he was a really good run defender when it came to stopping the run in college. So one of the other instances of him being a good penetrator of offensive lines is him being able to stop the run. And against this team where, obviously we lose Clayton Adams and now he's the, offensive coordinator. I don't believe he's calling the plays, but he's coordinating, or he's just like, he's taking a better title to do possibly the same job that he was doing here with the Arizona. And we couldn't even see this coming when it came to the coach. When they went ahead and hired the coach, and we thought to ourselves, that's like a step down. What are you doing? Actually, I don't care what they do. They can hire whoever the heck they want. I'm not really particularly a fan of the Cowboys anyway, but as a whole, it's like saying, like, you guys are an embarrassment. And then they show out and show that they have great offensive prowess with the moves that they made. Obviously, giving away Micah Parsons is doing a favor to another team that we just got done playing. Either way, we would have had to face Micah Parsons this week or the next, or the next game, regardless. But the fact that they lost that piece and now their defense is worse is kind of the only reason as to why I think we could hang around with this team. They do not have anything when it comes to like defensive prowess to be able to do things like the Cardinals. They have given up like a 40 burger already, the Cardinals, for all the defensive deficiencies that they've had, and some of the other stuff that they have. They really haven't given that much. They gave up a 30 burger to the team that's number one in offense in the NFL. So that's like kind of goes hand in hand and whatnot. So that's the only reason why I have hope against the Cowboys.
Yeah, totally. I think that is something where your hope is that you can stop the slide. You don't want it to turn into a 6-game slide against the Dallas Cowboys. Let's go ahead here, and we're going to kind of get to the end of our show wrap up there, but we are going to have at least a couple of questions, at least as far as the future of the Arizona Cardinals from our audience here. So let's go ahead here with our audience. It's going to be overtime here on the Redbird Reboot podcast. AZ Jace is reaching out, asking if we watch any Ty Simpson. So this is already, people are looking at this. All right, if we take this inevitably to its end, and I think it was John Gambador who even mentioned this, if the Cardinals finish with a 4 or 5 win season, coaching staff isn't safe, players aren't safe, you're probably looking at this with Jacoby Brissett and how this team has looked more efficient under offense. You have less maybe of some of the big plays you get with Kyler. It's been maybe a little more even keeled, but when it's come down to pressure, we've seen a little bit more willingness to hang in the pocket, take the hit, and get rid of the ball in Jacoby Brissett's case. If you're going to be moving on from Kyler Murray, you're going to be looking at quarterback for next year. So yes, I've watched a bit of Ty Simpson. I know AZ Jace. What's interesting too is that Silverwolf has an interesting point about like people who are hoping for a quarterback, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of that during our bye weeks, such as who are some of the top prospects. Like, are we starting to talk about tanking already? Like, is tankathon.com going to be a weekly session on our shows at least? It's bummer to think about that already 7 games into what you had hoped was going to be a team contending for a playoff spot. Saying that the team is still years away before spending a first-round pick on a quarterback of the future. It's kind of a spot, I think, at least, where ultimately, if you get the right coach and the right quarterback, you do see things turn around very quickly. I look at the Los Angeles Chargers, brought in a proven guy in Jim Harbaugh. I don't think the Cardinals have that capacity to bring in a proven coach like that. There's not one just sitting around, of course. I don't think that Michael Bidwell's had the cachet to be able to bring in one of those guys probably ever. At least not in his history thus far. The closest he was able to get was the likes of Bruce Arians and Wisenhunt. But I think when you're talking about one of those plays, as AZ Jace points out, like they should have passed on Joe Burrow if they had the chance. And I think when you look at the Chargers, they get Justin Herbert, they get Jim Harbaugh. They go out there and are able to, they lose to the Colts, but are still solidly in place despite a plethora of injuries and a really, really beat up offensive line. Whereas the Miami Dolphins, on the other hand, take Tua Tagovailoa. They have a bit more of a less disciplinarian, more just unique kind of like offensive coordinator type of coach in Mike McDaniel. And they are really struggling with a 1-5 record. Right now, they're basically just a Jets team away from being winless on the season. It shows, I think, Marcos, that if you don't have the right coach, you're dead in the water. If you don't have the right quarterback, you can also sometimes be dead in the water. But as we've seen with a team like the Indianapolis Colts this year, if you get a good enough quarterback with a good head coach, that automatically is one of the best pathways to getting back to relevancy in the National Football League. And that's why I think the Cardinals will have a decision at the end of the season. We'll see what Jonathan Gannon brings out of the bye, but it would not shock me if they get to the end of the season and despite liking and wanting Jonathan Gannon to succeed, would not shock me if they had to move on.
Yeah, so we have 2 instances of a team signing like what they believe is either journeyman or making a trade for the case of the Detroit Lions, they didn't think that Jared Goff was going to be the guy for the future. They just gave away Matthew Stafford, got the assets and returned, and thought to themselves, this is going to be our bridge guy. We saw in 2021 that the Lions were like one of the worst teams in the NFL. Nobody had any trust in what Jared Goff can do, and then you kind of saw it little by little because of the fact that you had a great guy developing in an offensive coordinator and I always forget names whenever I do this, but we all know who I'm talking about, the Bears head coach. Anyways, you had him develop as a great offensive coordinator and become who he is alongside with someone like Jared Goff, who then got the confidence to become the player that he became because he started making throws that he wasn't doing when he was with Sean McVay with the Los Angeles Rams. And the same thing is going right now with somebody like different circumstance, of course, with Daniel Jones and Shane Steichen. Shane Steichen was seen like a brilliant offensive mind. He doesn't really get his quarterback. They draft somebody who thinks he's going to be his quarterback, and AR-15, they don't see him ascending to that place. So then, of course, after Daniel Jones spent like half a year with the Minnesota Vikings, they take a chance on someone like Daniel Jones, former first-round pick. They're thinking to themselves, the worst thing he could do is he could be a backup for us while, Anthony Richards, I believe his name is, or Richardson, while he continues to develop, and he, for some reason, showed something better during the offseason and whatnot and took over that spot, and now look where they're at.
Yeah, totally. I think that's something that's really interesting. As far as getting back to the Ty Simpson, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the other draft picks and other areas, at least for when we get there. Right now, the biggest thing we're looking forward to is the impending return of Kyler Murray, and that's something I'm very excited for us to be able to see and to talk about a bit. Thank you guys again for tuning in. I know it's been a little bit of a shorter show than our usual hour. We're going to try to do a little bit of a quick hitter before our film study that we'll have on Wednesdays for the most part this season. Marcos, we're also planning on doing shows next week with the bye week. We're going to hopefully have a special guest on for one show. I know that we've also gotten a couple of people that we've reached out to in the past. Well, hopefully without being able to spoil or too much giveaway, we will have kind of a co-show with Giacomo. The Cardinal Rule will be one of those that we're going to plan ahead, which is super excited that we'll be able to kind of get Joe on with the reboot. We've had him before on the past. We've gone on his show before too. We'll get another now that we're in this whole Cardinal network of podcasts. Super excited that we're going to be able to have that. We'll also have hopefully another combination show that we'll be able to do in the future. I know with Jackie, she's talked about for a little bit, wanting to see if we could get one of us two onto a Bird and Goal podcast in the future. We'll give some updates on that next week. Guys, this has been the Redbird Reboot podcast for the most part. It's time for us now to, for the foreseeable future, go ahead and log off. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Marcos is available at pancakesoul on x.com. You can find me at Blake Murphy 7. Thank you guys so much, and go Cardinals.